Some inventions were meant to help, but ended up causing chaos, disaster, and even death. From toxic chemicals to weapons that could wipe out entire cities, history is full of creations that did more harm than good. How did these inventions go so wrong, and which one left the biggest scar on the world? Anthrax as a bioweapon. Anthrax wasn't always a weapon. Scientists studied it to understand bacteria better, leading to vaccines for people at risk, like soldiers and farm workers. But it didn't take long for governments to see its darker potential. The Soviet Union's biopreparat program secretly mass-produced anthrax for warfare, despite international bans. In 2001, anthrax-laced letters in the US caused panic, proving how easily it could be turned into a terrorist weapon. The attack led to stricter biosecurity measures, with governments worldwide scrambling to control dangerous pathogens. Today, anthrax remains a major concern in bioterrorism discussions, pushing scientists to develop better detection methods and stronger regulations. What started as a medical breakthrough became one of the world's most feared biological threats, reshaping global security policies. Chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, and the ozone crisis. CFCs were once considered a perfect solution for cooling systems and aerosol sprays. They were stable, non-toxic, and non-flammable, making them ideal for refrigerators, air conditioners, and spray cans. But in the 1970s, scientists realized these chemicals had a serious side effect. When released, they floated up into the stratosphere, breaking down the ozone layer, Earth's natural shield against harmful UV rays. The damage was worst over Antarctica, where a massive hole formed, increasing the risk of skin cancer and environmental harm. This led to the Montreal Protocol in 1987, an international agreement to phase out CFCs. While the ozone layer is slowly recovering, the chemicals linger for decades, serving as a reminder of how a seemingly harmless invention can cause widespread damage. DDT, dichlorodephenyltrichloroethane, and the Silent Spring Reckoning. DDT was once a hero in pest control. During World War II, it protected soldiers from insect-borne diseases, and after the war, farmers relied on it to save crops from destructive pests. It seemed like a miracle until scientists noticed something alarming. DDT didn't just kill insects, it built up in the environment, poisoning birds, fish, and eventually humans. Eagles and other birds of prey nearly vanished because their eggshells became too thin to survive. In 1962, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring exposed the dangers, sparking public outrage. Governments were forced to act, and by the 1970s, bans started rolling in. While DDT helped fight malaria, its environmental toll was too high. The world learned a hard lesson about long-term consequences hiding behind short-term solutions. Landmines, the war that never ends. Landmines were created to trap enemies and protect territory, but they never knew when to stop. Used heavily in both world wars, they were buried in the ground, waiting to explode under pressure. The problem? They stayed there long after the wars ended, turning battlefields into deadly minefields for civilians. Countries like Cambodia and Afghanistan are still dealing with them, decades later. Farmers, children, and everyday people step on them, losing limbs or lives. Clearing them is slow, expensive, and dangerous, but efforts continue. The Ottawa Treaty in 1997 aimed to ban landmines, with many nations agreeing to stop production and remove existing ones. While progress has been made, millions remain buried, making past wars a present-day threat for those living in affected regions. Synthetic opioids, from pain relief to addiction crisis. Opioids have been used for pain relief for centuries, with morphine and heroin once considered medical breakthroughs. As scientists searched for stronger and more accessible options, synthetic opioids like fentanyl were created. They worked fast and required only tiny doses, but that also made them incredibly dangerous. Even a few milligrams of fentanyl can be fatal, and as it became widely available, addiction rates skyrocketed. What started as a medical tool turned into a crisis, with millions falling into dependency. Governments scrambled to control its spread, tightening regulations and cracking down on illegal production. Treatment programs expanded, but the damage was done. Overdose deaths continue to rise, proving that even the most well-intended medical advancements can spiral into a disaster when misused. Coal power, fueling industry at a devastating cost. Coal powered the Industrial Revolution, turning cities into hubs of progress. It kept factories running, homes warm, and machines moving. But the thick smoke pouring from chimneys had a price. Air pollution choked the skies, causing respiratory diseases and coating cities in soot. Coal plants became major contributors to climate change, releasing carbon dioxide that trapped heat and altered weather patterns. Deforestation, acid rain, and contaminated water followed, leaving lasting damage. As awareness grew, countries pushed for cleaner energy sources. Wind, solar, and hydroelectric power started replacing coal, but the transition is slow. Many regions still rely on it, balancing economic needs with environmental concerns. The shift is happening, but the damage from centuries of burning coal remains a challenge the world is still trying to fix. Deepfake technology, the age of digital deception. Deepfake technology started as a novelty, swapping faces in videos for entertainment. AI-powered programs made it easy to create lifelike footage, but the fun quickly turned into something more sinister. Politicians and public figures were digitally manipulated to say things they never said, fueling fake news and propaganda. Scammers used it to impersonate people, spreading misinformation and blackmailing victims. The technology advanced so much that even experts struggled to tell real from fake. Governments and tech companies rushed to develop detection tools, but the race between fraudsters and regulators continues. Laws against deepfakes are emerging, but enforcement remains tricky. What began as an impressive piece of AI innovation now threatens privacy, trust, and truth itself, forcing society to rethink how it consumes digital content. Single-use plastics, convenience at a catastrophic cost. Disposable plastics changed daily life in the 20th century, making packaging, utensils, and bags cheap and convenient. They were easy to produce and just as easy to throw away. The problem was that they didn't go away. Plastic waste piled up in landfills, clogged rivers, and floated in oceans, harming marine life. Birds and sea creatures mistook plastic for food, while microplastics seeped into water in the food chain. Recycling was supposed to help, but most plastic isn't recyclable, and much of it ends up as pollution. Governments started banning plastic bags and straws, while companies turned to biodegradable alternatives. Despite these efforts, billions of plastic products are still discarded every day, leaving the world to deal with the consequences of decades of careless disposal. Nuclear weapons, the ultimate destructive force. The Manhattan Project gave the world nuclear weapons, changing warfare forever. In 1945, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, instantly killing thousands and leaving long-term radiation effects. The devastation was so extreme that nations scrambled to either develop their own nukes or prevent their use. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union stockpiled warheads, both knowing that launching one would mean total annihilation. This concept, called mutually assured destruction, MAD, kept nuclear war at bay, but kept the world on edge. Treaties have reduced arsenals, but the threat never disappeared. Countries still hold thousands of nuclear weapons, and tensions between global powers mean the risk remains. While they were meant to end wars, their existence keeps the world in constant fear of the worst. Agent Orange, a toxic legacy of war. Agent Orange was meant to strip away jungle cover during the Vietnam War, making it easier for US troops to spot enemy forces. But it wasn't just trees that suffered. The herbicide contained dioxin, a toxic compound that poisoned the land and those who came into contact with it. Soldiers exposed to it developed cancers, nerve disorders, and other life-threatening conditions. Civilians weren't spared either. Birth defects, miscarriages, and severe illnesses spread across generations. Even decades later, contaminated areas in Vietnam still impact local communities. Lawsuits and protests forced governments to acknowledge the damage, leading to compensation for some victims. But many continue to fight for justice, as the effects of Agent Orange remain a painful reminder that weapons of war don't always stop harming people when the battles end. Climate engineering, a risky attempt to manipulate nature. Climate engineering sounds like a quick fix, cooling the planet by blocking sunlight or removing carbon dioxide from the air. Scientists have proposed spraying particles into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight or building machines to suck up greenhouse gases. But tampering with nature is never that simple. Changing weather patterns could trigger droughts in some places and floods in others. Once started, reversing these effects might not be possible. There's also the ethical dilemma. Should a few countries have the power to control global climate? Many argue that relying on technology distracts from real solutions, like cutting emissions and switching to clean energy. While research continues, climate engineering remains a gamble. If mishandled, it could create new problems worse than the ones it was meant to solve. AI-controlled military systems. The rise of autonomous warfare. AI-powered military systems have changed the way wars are fought. Drones can now identify targets, fire weapons, and even make split-second decisions without human intervention. While this reduces risks for soldiers, it also raises serious concerns. Machines don't understand morality, and errors in programming can lead to accidental attacks on civilians. The lack of human oversight means life-or-death decisions could be made by an algorithm with no accountability. There's also the fear that AI-controlled weapons could escalate conflicts by removing the hesitation that comes with human judgment. Countries are now debating whether these systems should be banned or restricted, but technology is advancing faster than regulations. Without proper safeguards, AI and warfare could lead to a future where battles are fought with no human involvement at all. Asbestos, the hidden killer in construction. Asbestos was once a construction marvel. It was cheap, fire-resistant, and great for insulation, making it a go-to material for buildings in the 20th century. The danger wasn't obvious at first. Tiny asbestos fibers, when inhaled, settled in the lungs, leading to deadly diseases like mesothelioma and lung cancer, sometimes decades after exposure. Construction workers, miners, and even people living in asbestos-filled homes unknowingly breathed in these toxic fibers. By the time the health risks were clear, asbestos was everywhere. Removing it became a slow and costly process, requiring strict safety measures. Many countries banned it, but in some places it's still used. Safer materials have replaced it, but its legacy remains, hidden in old buildings, waiting to be dealt with before it can do more harm. Leaded gasoline, a toxic mistake that lasted too long. Leaded gasoline was introduced in the 1920s to stop engines from knocking, making cars run smoother. It worked, but at a terrible cost. The lead in the fuel didn't just disappear, it spread into the air, soil, and water. People inhaled toxic fumes daily, and children were the most affected. Lead exposure caused brain damage, learning disabilities, and developmental issues, with entire generations unknowingly poisoned. Despite growing evidence of harm, oil companies fought regulations, keeping leaded fuel on the market for decades. It wasn't until the late 20th century that countries started phasing it out, but by then the damage was done. Cleanup efforts continue, but the lesson remains clear. Profits should never come before public health, and industries must be held accountable for the long-term impact of their products. Thalidomide, a tragic failure in drug safety. Thalidomide was promoted in the 1950s as a safe treatment for morning sickness, offering relief to pregnant women. Doctors prescribed it widely, unaware of the hidden danger. The drug interfered with fetal development, leading to thousands of babies being born with severe limb deformities, missing arms and legs, or other life-threatening conditions. By the time it was pulled from the market, the damage was irreversible. This disaster exposed the lack of proper drug testing, pushing governments to enforce stricter regulations to prevent similar tragedies. Many survivors still struggle with lifelong disabilities, and lawsuits forced pharmaceutical companies to provide compensation. The thalidomide scandal reshaped medicine, making safety trials more rigorous, but it remains a reminder of what happens when drugs are rushed to market without thorough testing. History's most dangerous inventions still shape our world. Which one do you think caused the most lasting damage? Drop your thoughts below.